The story begins with a boy named Angus, whose mother sent him to swim in the sea. However, instead of swimming, Angus decided to sit quietly by the shore. Suddenly, he noticed a large egg submerged in the water. Curious, he pulled the egg out of the water. As he was examining it, his mother Annie arrived and asked him to return home. Angus quickly hid the egg in his bucket and left with his mother. Annie was angry with him because he didn't even attempt to swim or get into the water. She scolded him, saying, "Do what I tell you next time." Angus didn't say anything and headed straight to the workshop as soon as they reached home. This workshop used to belong to his father, Charlie, who was currently serving in the army, fighting for their country. Angus looked at his father's photograph, reminiscing about him, and then checked the calendar to see when Charlie would return home. Afterward, he took out the egg he had found in the sea, cleaned it, and removed its outer layer. To his amazement, it revealed a shiny blue surface. Before he could examine it further, Annie called for him. He hurriedly left the egg in the workshop and ran back to the house. That night, it began to rain heavily, and Angus grew worried about the egg's safety in the workshop. He rushed there in the rain, only to find that the egg had already hatched. Looking around, he spotted a strange creature that had emerged from the egg. When he tried to touch the creature, it snapped at him, making Angus realize that it was probably hungry. He quickly fetched some food, which calmed the creature down. Angus lovingly fed it, but soon Annie called for him again, and he reluctantly returned to bed. The next morning, Angus woke to find a group of soldiers at their house. Annie and Angus's sister, Christy, went with him to meet Captain Hamilton. The captain informed them that enemy soldiers might attempt to infiltrate the country through the sea. Hence, his team would stay at their house to prepare for any confrontation. The soldiers began setting up their equipment and workspaces in the house. Annie instructed Angus and Christy to return to their rooms. Later, Angus went to the library to find a book about the strange creature. Once he found a book, he rushed back to the workshop, only to find the place in chaos. The creature was trying to chew on Charlie's boots. Angus realized it was hungry again and went to the kitchen to get food. However, Sergeant Strunk, the soldier's cook, stopped him, saying he wasn't allowed in the kitchen. Angus asked if he could take out the kitchen waste, and Strunk agreed. Angus then fed all the leftover food to the creature, watching it eat with joy. He decided to name the creature Crusoe. Afterward, Angus tried to learn more about the creature by reading, but he couldn't find much useful information. Meanwhile, Crusoe finished all the food, so Angus filled a trash can with water, allowing Crusoe to swim and enjoy himself. Meanwhile, Hamilton was preparing his men for a possible enemy attack. He wanted them to be ready at all times. On the other hand, Angus left Crusoe alone in the workshop and went back to the house to avoid raising Annie's suspicion. Later, we see a man named Lewis arrive in town and visit Annie, who was in the workshop at the time. He told her that he wanted to work there. Annie said he could work, but he would have to clean the entire workshop first. Lewis immediately got to work. During the cleaning, he took out the trash can where Angus had hidden Crusoe. When Angus saw this, he ran to stop Lewis, but Crusoe was no longer there. Angus then asked Lewis who he was and what he was doing in the workshop. Angus told him this workshop belonged to his father, and he would be back from the war soon. Lewis replied, "Look, kid, your dad can do whatever he wants when he returns, but until then, I'm in charge of this workshop." Hearing this, Angus walked away, frustrated, and began searching for Crusoe. We see that Crusoe had sneaked into Angus's house, and Strunk's dog, Churchill, started chasing him. Luckily, Churchill was tied to a chain and couldn't reach Crusoe. Crusoe ran and hid in the bathroom. At that moment, Christy entered the bathroom, saw Crusoe, and screamed loudly. Hearing her screams, Angus immediately realized that Christy had seen Crusoe. He rushed to calm her down and explained that Crusoe was his pet, which had hatched from an egg he found by the sea. Christy, still frightened, promised not to tell Annie after Angus assured her that Crusoe wouldn't harm anyone. Meanwhile, Annie came to the workshop to talk to Lewis and brought some of her husband Charlie's old clothes to give him. Seeing this, Lewis asked if Charlie was ever coming back. With a heavy heart, Annie replied that he would not. Lewis then mentioned that Angus had told him Charlie was returning from the war. Annie explained that Angus was still a child and didn't know the truth. In reality, Charlie had died when his ship sank in the sea. Later, Annie asked Lewis to help fix a leak in the bathroom. When Lewis went to the bathroom, we see that it was the same bathroom where Angus and Christie had hidden Crusoe. As Lewis knocked on the door, Angus and Christie tried to stop him from coming in. After waiting for a while, Lewis warned them that he would complain to Annie if they didn't open the door. Reluctantly, Christie opened the door. When Lewis entered, he saw Crusoe and was terrified. Shocked, he asked what it was. Angus told him the entire story about Crusoe. Lewis, amazed, tried to touch Crusoe, but the creature snapped at him. Lewis then said, "Crusoe looks exactly like a seahorse." He explained that a seahorse was one of the rarest creatures in the world, and legend had it that only one seahorse existed on Earth at a time. When one died, a new egg would hatch, giving birth to another. Lewis also told them about the magical powers of the seahorse. However, just then, Annie knocked on the door. Angus and Christie panicked, unsure of what to do next. Angus sought Lewis's help to hide Crusoe because Annie would never allow him to keep it in the house. Lewis agreed to help. When Annie entered, she couldn't see Crusoe, even though Crusoe peeked out briefly. Lewis somehow managed to handle the situation. Later, when Annie went outside, she met Hamilton, who invited her to the soldiers' dinner. That night, Lewis suggested to Angus that they should return Crusoe to the sea, as it was its true home. But Angus refused, insisting that Crusoe belonged with him. Soon, the soldiers' dinner began at the house. Angus left Crusoe in the bathroom and went out for something, accidentally leaving the door open. Taking advantage of the situation, Crusoe escaped again. Meanwhile, Strunk's dog Churchill caught Crusoe's scent and went crazy trying to find him. When Churchill finally spotted Crusoe, he began chasing him all over the house. During the chase, they climbed onto the dining table, that ruining the entire dinner. However, everyone only saw Churchill and blamed him. Poor Churchill ended up getting scolded. Meanwhile, Crusoe ran outside and jumped into a fountain where he found plenty of fish to eat. Angus searched everywhere for Crusoe. At that point, Lewis told Angus to go home, as Annie was upset about the dinner incident. Lewis assured him he would find Crusoe and bring him back safely. Reluctantly, Angus returned home. After much searching, Lewis found Crusoe near the fountain, but Crusoe had grown significantly larger. Lewis immediately called Angus, and when Angus saw Crusoe, he realized it was time to let Crusoe return to the sea. They placed Crusoe in the back of a truck and headed to the ocean. Upon reaching the shore, they finally released Crusoe into the water. Angus was deeply saddened by the separation, but understood it was the right thing to do. The next day, we see a man named Jimmy fishing in the ocean with his friend Hugh. Suddenly, Hugh felt something huge tugging at their fishing line. When they tried to pull it up, their boat began sinking into the water. Suddenly, a massive Crusoe emerged in front of them, leaving them both stunned. Hugh, however, wanted to capture Crusoe, believing they could earn millions by selling it. Jimmy disagreed, but Crusoe began dragging them farther away from the shore. Finally, Jimmy cut the fishing line to save their lives. They saw Crusoe again from a distance and couldn't believe their eyes. They had never seen or heard of such an extraordinary creature before. Meanwhile, Hamilton told Angus that his mother wanted him to start training for the army. Angus began helping the soldiers with their work, but he quickly grew bored. One day, he slipped away from Captain Hamilton and ran toward the ocean. He called out for Crusoe, but couldn't see him anywhere. Determined, Angus took a boat and ventured out to find his friend. Before long, Crusoe emerged from the water in front of him. Angus was amazed at how much Crusoe had grown. Overjoyed, he jumped onto Crusoe's back, though he was initially frightened. Crusoe took Angus on a thrilling ride across the sea, which Angus thoroughly enjoyed. Crusoe and Angus shared a special bond that would never be forgotten. When Angus brought Crusoe back to the shore, Strunk's dog Churchill was also there and caught Crusoe's scent. Strunk was with Churchill, and when Churchill ran toward the shore, Strunk followed. Strunk was astonished to see such a strange and massive creature. He couldn't believe his eyes. That night, Angus told Christy and Lewis about his adventure at sea with Crusoe, which made them very happy. Annie saw them laughing from outside and was about to leave when Lewis noticed her and followed. Annie thanked Lewis, saying that because of him, she saw her children laughing freely after a long time. Lewis smiled and brushed off her gratitude. Meanwhile, Jimmy told a reporter named Jock about the strange creature he had seen in the sea. Hearing this, Jock thought he could use the story to attract investors to the town by highlighting it as a tourist attraction. However, Hugh disagreed, saying the town was fine the way it was. Jock argued that if there was a dangerous creature in the sea, the public had the right to know about it. The next day, Hamilton took Annie and her children to the top of a hill to show them his army's preparation. He demonstrated the weapons they used against enemies. The captain then ordered his men to showcase an attack on hidden enemies in the water. Hearing this, Angus realized Crusoe could be in danger. He begged Annie to stop the soldiers, but she didn't understand what he was saying and asked him to stay quiet. Christy supported Angus, saying he was telling the truth, but Annie didn't listen to her either. As the soldiers began their mock attack in the water, Crusoe became terrified and struggled to survive the dangerous assaults. Meanwhile, Jimmy and Jock had come to the shore to photograph Crusoe, but couldn't catch even a glimpse of him. Instead, they made a fake model of Crusoe, took pictures, and published them in the newspaper the next day. A few days later, Strunk read the newspaper and realized it was the same terrifying creature he had seen on the shore. Strunk, along with some soldiers, decided to find and capture Crusoe. That night, Christy went to Angus's room and the two, along with Lewis, sneaked out of the house to check on Crusoe. When they reached the shore, Angus called out to Crusoe. At first, Crusoe didn't appear, but when he did, he had become wild and uncontrollable. He didn't recognize Angus and even tried to attack him. This shocked Angus and Lewis, as they couldn't understand what had happened. Crusoe soon returned to the water, and Angus blamed Lewis for this, saying it was his idea to leave Crusoe in the sea. Meanwhile, Strunk and the soldiers were searching for Crusoe in their boat. They had come with the intent to kill him. As they approached the shore, they heard Churchill barking and realized Churchill had spotted something. Strunk ordered the boat to move toward the sound. Suddenly, Crusoe attacked Churchill and then disappeared, leaving everything silent again. The soldiers were confused and fired bullets in the direction of the noise. Suddenly, Crusoe reappeared and rammed their boat, throwing all of them into the water. On the other hand, when Hamilton heard about the gunfire in the sea, he assumed it was an enemy attack and immediately ordered his soldiers to retaliate. He told Annie to hide in the house with the children. At that moment, Annie noticed Christy and asked where Angus was. Christy replied that Angus was not in the house. Hearing this, Annie became very anxious and insisted that she could not leave Angus alone in such a dangerous situation. Despite Hamilton's attempts to stop her, Annie refused to listen and demanded to go to the sea with him. Left with no choice, Hamilton had to take her along. Meanwhile, Crusoe had completely lost control and grabbed Strunk in his mouth. Just then, Angus arrived in time and tried to stop Crusoe, but Crusoe didn't listen to him. Determined to help, Angus stepped into the water to get closer to Crusoe, but suddenly slipped and started drowning. Seeing this, Crusoe released Strunk and rushed to save Angus. Crusoe quickly brought Angus back to the shore, but Angus was unconscious. Lewis and Crusoe tried hard to revive him, and after several attempts, Angus finally regained consciousness. Angus was thrilled to see Crusoe behaving as his old self again. Meanwhile, Captain Hamilton received a report that no enemy boats were found, but he still ordered his soldiers to continue attacking the water. Soon, Hamilton himself arrived at the shore, but by that time, Crusoe had hidden underwater again. Annie ran to her son Angus, relieved to see him safe and sound. Angus tried to explain everything about Crusoe to her, but Annie, frustrated, scolded him and told him to stop living in a fantasy world. At that moment, Crusoe emerged from the water, and Annie finally realized that Angus had been telling the truth all along. Hamilton was equally shocked to see such a massive creature. However, as per Hamilton's earlier orders, the soldiers started attacking the water again. To save Crusoe, Angus climbed onto his back and guided him away from the soldiers. Annie was terrified and begged Hamilton to stop the attack immediately. Hamilton tried to contact his soldiers, but the radio stopped working. Hamilton, Annie, and Lewis then got into a boat and went after Angus. With Angus's help, Crusoe managed to avoid the soldiers' attacks. Just as they were about to escape completely, the soldiers deployed an underwater net they had set up earlier to trap enemies. Unfortunately, Crusoe couldn't cross the net in time. Hamilton's boat reached Crusoe, and Lewis told Angus to jump into the boat. Before parting, Angus told Crusoe that he was his best friend and that he would always remember him. Angus then leapt into the water and climbed back into the boat. Crusoe dived underwater and with a powerful leap, cleared the net. Seeing this, Angus and his companions were overjoyed because Crusoe was now safe and far from the soldiers' attacks. So, did you find this story truly engaging or a bit childish? Let us know in the comments so we can bring you even better movies in the future.